Does God exist? And this is the moral argument. Last week was the cosmological argument. Two was the intuitive argument. And so we're going to look at it from a standpoint of the moral argument and see if it holds water. So I've got a chart here. I don't know how well you can read it. And it's moral truth, absolute or relative. And I want you to look at the percentages here. The elders and the boomers, which elders first, only 33% polled say they believe in absolute truth. 39% said they believed in relative truth, and 28% said they never thought about it at all. Boomers is 42% believe in absolute truth, 41% relative truth, 17% never thought about it at all. Gen Xers, you can go all the way down and see how each age group stacks up here. Practicing Christians, only 59% of practicing Christians believe in absolute truth. Only 59%, which is higher than anything else on the chart here, but still 59%, 28% don't believe in absolute truth. They believe it's relative, and 14% haven't thought about it at all. So, truth, the moral argument. If we can't get people to agree on a definition of truth, it's hard to make an argument on a moral basis for anything. But we're going to give it a shot anyway. Do we need that poll or any poll to tell us and let us know there's absolute truth? There are absolute truths out there, and we know that there is. And so we're going to see how it stacks up with what atheists believe and what we believe as Christians, and see which argument is the strongest. All the polling shows that a high percentage of people polled either do not believe in absolute truth or have not even thought about it at all. Most people act as if absolute truth exists, don't they? They really do. Certain things you accept. Not a single one of you woke up this morning and said, I wonder if the sun's going to come up today. You didn't even consider it whatsoever, did you? You didn't think about it at all. There's certain things you just take for granted. We even take for granted that we got ready to come out here, and I crawled in the car and put the key in. When I turned the key, I expected the car to crank up. That's not nearly as absolute as the sun coming up, but it cranked, and you can see I'm here, so it worked. Why do most people believe that it is evil or wicked for someone? I'm going to give a list here. Why do most people believe that it's evil or wicked for someone to walk into a random house, shoot everyone in it, and steal everything in sight? Why does everybody believe it? Why for a man to beat a kind, innocent woman? Why does everybody think that's wrong or wicked, evil? For an adult to torture an innocent child simply for the fun of it? Or for parents to have children for the sole purpose of abusing them every day of their lives? How many people do you know that would not agree that all those things are evil and wrong? So these people that are saying they do not believe in absolute truth, believe in absolute truth. They just don't know they believe in absolute truth. There's a disconnect somewhere. Evolutionist Edward Slingerland noted, humans have metaphysical rights. Now this is an evolutionist saying this. Rights that are a reality beyond what is perceptible to the senses and rely on moral values. So this is an atheist and an evolutionist saying that people do have these things, that they have a perception of. They have a perception of morals and of values and of absolutes, even when they don't themselves admit that they do. How many people do you think really believe that it was acceptable behavior for the Nazis to exterminate 6 million Jews? Have you ever heard anybody say that that was a good thing that the Nazis did? I've seen some on the internet saying that it was, and it was right to exterminate certain peoples, and we have Nazis in the United States here, some of them who believe that. They believe it's perfectly acceptable, and that the Jews are the evil that has created all the bad that there is in society. So there's people that believe that, but you don't talk to many people like that. Really, you can't think. It takes a warped person to think that was a good thing. Although objective morality may be outside the realm of the scientific method, every rational purpose can know that some things are innately good while other things are innately evil. Everybody should know that, shouldn't they? What is morally right and what is morally wrong may vary in some areas over time. There is basic morality that is accepted by most every culture throughout history. So, if we take a wide view of everything and look throughout history and look at what people accepted as being good and bad throughout in all recorded history, we'll find out that most of the same things every culture think is bad, and things they think is good. In other words, they have a sense of right and wrong. They have a moral code of some kind that's designed, that's established by something in their thinking, because everybody thinks that way. Philosophers Francis Beckwith and Gregory Kuhl said it well. They said, those who deny obvious moral rules, who say that murder and rape are morally benign, that cruelty is not a vice, and that cowardice is a virtue, do not merely have a different moral point of view, they have something wrong with them. And that's absolutely right. If you can't see those things and not understand that there's something there that's obvious that you would take for granted, that this is good and this is bad, there's something wrong with you. It's not just a matter of your teachings or your upbringing or anything else. There's something wrong with you. So the moral argument for the existence of God has been stated in a variety of ways through centuries. One way in which the basic argument has been worded is as follows. Premise number one: if God does not exist, then objective moral values do not exist. Premise number two: objective moral values exist. Conclusion: God exists. So that's your basic stated moral argument. Okay, let's take it from there. Thomas B. Warren, he says, if the moral code and or actions of any individual or society can properly be subjects of criticism as to real moral wrong, then there must be some objective standard, some higher law which transcends the provincial and transient, which is other than the particular moral code and which has an obligatory character which can be recognized. Now, what did he just say? He says, if if the moral code and or actions of any individual or society can properly be subjects of criticism. In other words, if you can say yes and discuss this is right, this is wrong, and you can establish all those outside of any particular one, then that tells you more about the moral code, moral value, and the moral argument than anything else. Number two, the moral code and or actions of any individual or society can properly be subject to criticism as to real moral wrong. In other words, we can establish certain things as right and wrong. If you don't think you can, and that societies do, get out here on the highway and drive 100 miles an hour everywhere you go. Sooner or later, somebody's going to convince you that that's not the right thing to do, and courts will help them with it. Number three, therefore, there must be some objective standard. So, okay, what is he getting to now? Therefore, there must be some objective standard, some higher law, which transcends the provincial and transient, which is other than the particular moral code and which has an obligatory character which can be recognized. In other words, what he's saying is there must be, if all these things or all these statements that he said are true, there must be something outside of civilization that has determined that these things are right and these things are wrong, because all civilizations have understood these things to be right and these things to be wrong. Now, there are certain things that will change from culture to culture, and it was just like slavery. People thought slavery was right at one time. Now, I don't think many people think slavery is right and acceptable. But there's things that change, but they're basic things that they believe are the same. That have always been that way. So there must be something outside of our civilization, outside of our culture, outside of any government that has determined these things. Otherwise, why do they exist everywhere? Warren used as a case study Adolf Hitler's Nazi regime in the 1930s, 1940s. Nazi Germany committed state-sponsored genocide of so-called inferior races. In other words, if you can get a race to be inferior to yours, or a people group to be inferior to yours, then you might can reason out a reason why they don't need to be consuming our resources. We need to get rid of them. Anyway, of the approximately 9 million Jews who lived in Europe, now get this, there was about 9 million Jews that lived in Europe at the beginning of the 1930s. Some 6 million of them were exterminated. Now think about that. If 2/3 of this neighborhood was exterminated in a 10-year period of time, less than a 10-year period of time. The Nazis murdered approximately 1 million Jewish children, 2 million Jewish women, and 3 million Jewish men. And it's always interesting to me when you see, if you have a madman at the top that believes in this is one thing. Then you have 5 or 6 madmen at the top that believe in this. But then you have a whole culture that believes in this. How can you get that many people to go along with something of this nature? Whether theist or atheist, most rational people admit that some things really are atrocious. That case with those people dying in that truck, that's an atrocious thing that occurred. There's nothing good about it. Just as rationally as we can look at math, we can look at certain things and know that right is wrong and right is right and wrong is wrong. We don't have to figure out all the intricacies of it and where that comes from in order to know that certain things exist. It says, however, reason demands that objective good and evil can only exist if there is some real objective point of reference. In other words, you have to have some point of reference to go back to. How do we know what's legal in North Carolina? We have the laws. We have a point to go back to tell us that this is right and this is wrong. We have court rulings that tell us this is right and this is wrong. We have certain things that we know but there's a point of reference that you have to go back to. It has to tie back to something in order for it to be something that everybody accepts. How can an atheist logically call for something atrocious, deplorable, evil, or call something atrocious, deplorable, evil, or wicked? How can an atheist really do that if they're really true atheists? How can they say anything is atrocious, deplorable, evil, or wicked? What do you base it on? According to atheism, man is nothing but matter in motion. Humankind allegedly evolved from rocks and slime over billions of years. But whoever speaks of wrong rocks, moral minerals, corrupt chemicals, or sinful slime? You ever heard anybody referred to as an evil rock or a good rock? If a rock falls and hits you in the head, you think bad things about it. Bad eggs. People do not talk about morally depraved donkeys, evil elephants, or immoral monkeys. Hogs are not punished for being immoral when they eat their young. And I know they do. From being raised on the farm, I know they do. Komodo dragons are not corrupt because 10% of their diet consists of younger Komodo dragons. They eat their own for food. Black widows are not exterminated simply because I exterminate them because I don't want them around. But they're not exterminated simply because the female often kills the male after they mate. Dogs are not depraved for stealing the bone of another dog. Right? We don't consider we put a difference between animals and human beings, and we put a difference between rocks and slime and stone and human beings. We make a division there. Why is there a division there? If everything evolved, it came from the slime, it came from the matter, it came from the stone, it came from the primordial soup if it came through them, through animals, and to us, why is there a division, a distinction when it gets between the animals and to us? Because now, I've seen some animals I just think are, my grandmother used to have a cat that I think that cat was just evil. That was a mean cat, wasn't it? My grandmother's been gone for years now, so I can talk about her cat. But everybody, she finally had to get rid of the cat because the cat was so mean. But anyway, it's the cats, they don't know the difference. The fact that humans even contemplate morality testifies to the huge chasm between man and animals. The fact that we even contemplate it, that we think about it, that we even talk about morality, that we can even have the discussion. I like it when people say, well, let me get a little further along here and then I'll go to that. George Gaylord Simpson, one of the most recognized atheistic evolutionists of the 20th century. Here's something he said. He says, man is a result of a purposeless and materialistic process that did not have him in mind. He confessed that good and evil, right and wrong, concepts irrelevant in nature except from the human viewpoint, become real and pressing features of the whole cosmos as viewed morally, because morals arise only in man. Okay, now this is an atheist, an evolutionist who is saying this. He recognized this. He realized that there's a truth here, but he doesn't know what to do with it. We know what to do with it. Evolutionist Edward Slingerland again stated, humans, not animals, rely on moral values. Atheistic evolution cannot logically explain morals. Real, objective, moral, right or wrong cannot exist if humans are the offspring of animals. So where in the evolutional process did morals arise? Where did we get morals from no morals at all? At what process in the evolutional chain, according to the evolutionists, did that come about? Think about, for instance, people say that they talk about how intelligent some animals are, and they're close to as intelligent as we are. And they say most of them that I know of, they say the most intelligent animal that we know on Earth is the dolphin. I have a question. How many dolphins have you ever known to build a hospital for dolphins? Have you seen interactions of dolphins? Have you seen anything at all that would give you an indication that these dolphins have any moral code whatsoever? But yet they're very intelligent. Young people who are not allowed to act like animals at school are frequently reminded in public school textbooks that they are the offspring of animals. Told not to act like animals, but they're told that they are animals. They're told that they come from animals. Does that track? In 1994, millions of public high school students in America were introduced to a new biology textbook by Holt, Reinhardt, and Winston. What sort of amazing things did they learn? For one, they were informed you are an animal and share a common heritage with earthworms. So you came from earth. I always get a kick out of discussing this with evolutionists. I say, okay, so you're saying we came from apes, because I know what they're going to answer. No, we came from a common ancestry. I said, well, describe that common ancestry. Did it at some point come through a stage that looked like apes? They said, well, yeah. I said, well, what's the difference? Common ancestry means that you came from them. Can you imagine that your great grandparents way back were worms? They were earthworms. Didn't know that, did you? So you come to Wednesday night and you can learn all kinds of things. Charles Darwin declared in chapter 2 of his book, The Descent of Man, now listen to this, my object in this chapter is solely to show that there is no fundamental difference between man and the higher mammals in their mental faculties. That was Charles Darwin, the one that evolutionists and people look back to as the father of evolution, which he was not the first one that came up with the idea, but he's the one that propagated it. He's the one that he's given credit for it anyway. But he said the higher mammals than us have pretty much the same mental faculties. So you're no smarter than a chicken, or higher mammals are apes or dolphin or things of that nature. Have you ever, do you notice the difference when you go to the zoo of the way the chimpanzees act and what the humans act? Sometimes you wonder which one should be behind the glass, but you can still tell that there is a difference. One of the differences in the highest form of animal and humans is the ability to speak. What the highest form of every animal other than man, which one can speak and carry on an intelligible conversation?
I don't know about conversation, but parrots can speak.
They can speak words, but can they formulate ideas and concepts and then speak? What they do is they quote parrot what you have taught them to say. So in other words, they're not thinking up these concepts. But you take a child that's born about a year old, they babble some. Then at 2 years old, they babble a little. By the time they're 4 years old, they can carry on a conversation. And no matter how long you keep a chimpanzee and train them, they'll never be able to carry on a conversation. They had this, what was this gorilla's name that they had trained, woman had trained for years, and they were amazed because he could sign certain things. He could sign certain things, but it was a very limited level of communication that he could engage in, even with his sign language. Anyway, he says, Charles Darwin says, there's no fundamental difference between man and the higher mammals in their mental faculties. David Suzuki was interviewed by Joe Marchant of New Scientist magazine. Suzuki proclaimed, "We must acknowledge that we are animals. We must. We like to think of ourselves as elevated above other creatures, but the human body evolved from animals, period." This is something that annoyed me years ago when first time I saw the sign at the aquarium in Fort Fisher. And it had an exhibit there about whales, and it had a sign, and the sign said, "Whales evolved from elephants." Now, what I didn't like about the sign was if it had said, "According to the theory of evolution, whales evolved from elephants." I don't have a problem with it, but they stated it as a fact. Well, you can't prove that as a fact. You don't even have a constant flow of transitional forms from one to the other to get to where they are. They just had there were certain bones in the back of a whale. They said this is what used to be where the back legs were, and this is where the front legs were, where the flippers are, and all this kind of stuff. They never did in there get into the explanation of how you had a trunk here with two nostrils in it, somehow reverted around to one hole in the top of their head that they breathed out of. So you had to really do a good bit of contortion to get there. But he said, but the human body evolved from animals. He states it as a fact. You can't state that as a fact because there's no way there's not enough evidence to get there. Marchant's view on humanity: we should act like the animals we are. What if we did that? Some people do. That's the ones we have problems with.
They say it's fact that there are children that they have to allow to act like they think of themselves as a feline. And in school, those teachers have to humor that and let them lick their hands and act like an animal.
You know why that is?
Because the world is gone crazy.
Because those teachers are stupid.
Well, I mean,
If you
if they continue to work there, they are mandated to
now,
do
you're absolutely right. But just think about our world today. Think 10 years ago, if I'd have come in here and said, "Listen, a man can be a man today, and he can be a woman tomorrow. He can be both the next day, or neither one," and you'd have thought, "This guy's nuts." And now they're teaching that in school and demanding that people accept that and accept that idea and that concept. When you, did any of you had biology in the school? You know, it didn't take me long. I was raised in a house with just 4 boys. I have 3 brothers. And I was surprised when I was a little boy to find out that girls did not look like boys when they took their clothes off. Because one took her clothes off, and I was just about as big, and I thought, I was shocked. I didn't, but you know, from then on, I realized there's a difference. And it's something that you can tell very easily. Thomas B. Warren, the basic implication of the atheistic system does not allow objective moral right or objective moral wrong. You can't have an objective right and objective wrong in atheistic evolution. Keep in mind to put in atheistic. Atheists cannot logically condemn the Nazis for objective moral evil while simultaneously saying that we arose from rocks and rodents. They cannot reasonably rebuke a child molester for being immoral while at the same time believing that we evolved from slime. Reason demands that objective good and evil can only exist if there is some real objective reference point. Is that not true? Richard Dawkins says, life has no higher purpose than to perpetuate the survival of DNA. Life has no design, no purpose, no evil, no good, nothing but blind, pitiless indifference. Isn't that a wonderful way to live? I would hate to be him if that's the way you look at life. If there is no higher purpose than to perpetuate the survival of DNA, then why should we care if people starve? Why should we care into these things? Why should we help the physically disadvantaged? Why should we care about any of this at all? All we're trying to do is pass on our DNA to the next group of people, the next generation, the next one, so that the survival of the fittest, the best DNA will survive to the next generation that follows us. According to this kind of thinking, Hitler was right. Here's what Adolf Hitler said. It is inconceivable that a higher people should painfully exist on a soil too narrow for it, whilst amorphous masses which contribute nothing to civilization occupy infinite tracts of a soil that is one of the richest in the world. In other words, why should we allow people to live in these? And this particular quote, if I remember correctly, he was talking about the Ukrainian people. Why should we let those people, those less civilized people, to inhabit all that land they have while we're running out of land here in Germany, is basically what he was saying, or in the Reich. Why should we do that? So long as DNA is passed on, it does not matter who or what gets hurt in the process. Isn't that a logical conclusion? Genes don't care about suffering because they don't care about anything. DNA neither cares nor knows. DNA just is. Although Dawkins could never prove that life's sole purpose is to perpetuate DNA, he is right about one thing. If there is no God, then there is no good and no evil, only pitiless indifference. So he got that part of it right. Now let's start nailing it down. Requirements for being able to have objective moral laws, 3 things are needed. 1, an absolute and an unchanging authority. 2, an absolute and unchanging standard. And 3, absolute truth. In other words, we have to have something to build on. There's three things that are needed: absolute and unchanging authority, two, absolute and unchanging standard, and three, an absolute. Well, if you didn't have an unchanging standard, how would you know how to behave from day to day? How would you, if you said they didn't put up any speed limit signs and they said, we're going to decide what the speed limit is today, but we're not going to tell you what it is, but we're going to give you a ticket if you drive faster than that or slower than that. Would that make any sense whatsoever? There has to be an objective standard. There has to be something to go with. Atheism and naturalism admit to nothing being absolute, that everything is random. That's what they say, and that everything is changing. In such an environment, no one can ever be sure anything is truly objectively right or wrong. It would change as time goes on. C.S. Lewis is always good for taking something complex and getting it down to something more simple. He said this: a man does not call a line crooked unless he has some idea of a straight line. Only makes sense. He has a standard. You have a straight line, that way you'll know if this line's crooked or if this line's crooked. If you don't have anything to compare it to, how do you know? For those without God, that unchanging straight line does not exist. In other words, to naturalists, atheists, and so on, there is no standard, there is no straight line to compare to, because there's nothing outside of us to determine what's right or wrong. Would that be a good society to live in? Then think back at the chart about the absolute truth. The latest charts on this past year, the people in the United States, I forgot what the percentage was, so I won't even mention the percentage. The lowest percentage of people ever polled in the United States to believe in God, it's the lowest this year that it's ever been since the polls were done. That's scary business. However, the rub comes from the fact that every human being recognizes moral absolutes. They may not practice them, but they understand and acknowledge them. Atheist philosopher Louise Anthony has stated, any argument against the objective reality of moral values will be based on premises that are less obvious than the existence of objective moral values themselves. In other words, she's kind of agreeing with us that there is a standard there. Even a small, have you ever, your grandkids or kids, have you ever said that's not fair? Where are they getting that standard? You're standing in line at a fast food place and somebody goes and breaks in line. What does everybody say? That's not fair. Why? What's wrong with breaking in line? Why is breaking in line wrong? You say, well, that's being selfish. Why is selfishness wrong? Why does it matter at all? Why does it mean anything whatsoever? If there is no objective standard, there is no absolute truth, there is no absolute right and wrong, there's no absolutes whatsoever, then so what if they break in line? That's what they want to do. Where does this universal understanding of moral right and wrong come from? An understanding that transcends human opinion. The moral argument for the existence of God can be stated in the following way. Laws imply a lawgiver. There is an objective moral law that everybody accepts, many of. Therefore, there is a moral lawgiver. Those things, when you look at those three together, those are objective, and you can see that they are truthful. Laws imply a lawgiver. In other words, can you imagine you say we have state laws, but nobody made these state laws. They just kind of appeared. We don't have our Constitution. Men didn't sit down in 1787 and draw up our Constitution. It just kind of popped up out of nowhere. Everybody's smart enough to know better than that. So laws imply a lawgiver. There is an objective moral law. Therefore, there is a moral lawgiver. Because the first you know is true. The second you know is true. And so you come to the final conclusion. True objective moral good cannot be defined without purpose. And purpose cannot be defined without a cause. Without God, the cause of everything. All that is left is time plus matter plus chance. And such a combination only produces chaos, not an absolute moral framework. Poet Steve Turner spells out this awful conclusion, what morals really equate to in a world without God, in his poem entitled Creed, which ends with these words. This is the last part of his poem. If chance be the father of all flesh, disaster is his rainbow in the sky. And when you hear state of emergency, sniper kills 10, troops on rampage, whites go looting, bomb blasts school, it is but the sound of man worshiping his maker. If everything is chance, there is no law, everything is random, then that's all you're doing. You can't say that any of that is wrong. Atheists find themselves in a conundrum. One, they must admit to objective morality, which ultimately means that a moral giver, i.e. God, who is above and beyond the provincial and transient exists. Or two, they must contend that everything is relative, that no action on earth could ever be objectively good or evil. Rather, everything is situational. So in other words, you have to accept one of those basic truths, period. And if you accept one, if one is true, the other can't be true. Charles Darwin again says, a man who has no assured and ever-present belief in the existence of a personal God or of a future existence with retribution and reward can have for his rule of life, as far as I can see, only to follow those impulses and instincts which are the strongest or which seem to him the best ones. Doesn't that sound like a good way to live out in society? If you don't accept that there's a God, that there's a creator, there's a lawgiver, then you live out life according to impulses and instincts. Doesn't that sound like what a lot of people are doing now and they're calling for? How many of you have heard in the last few days saying the ruling that struck down Roe versus Wade, regardless of what you feel about abortion, regardless of either way, have you heard people say, this is the end of our democracy? And I'm thinking, first place, we don't live in a democracy. It's a democratic republic, a constitutional republic. But because a decision of the Supreme Court was struck down by another decision of the Supreme Court, everything's falling apart and our democracy is in danger. That's the most ridiculous thing I ever heard, regardless of which way it goes. Who would want to live in a society in which everyone were to follow those impulses and instincts which are the strongest or which seem to him the best ones? That would be a terrible... Well, you wouldn't be safe in your house. People knock your windows out, and you what can you say? If there's no moral, objective right and wrong, society will completely fall apart and fall into chaos, and we will wind up with nothing. Can you begin to see why we are living today in a society in which we can be told that gender is fluid, that you can be a man today and a woman tomorrow, and neither or both the next day? When you have this being taught in our schools over and over and over and over and over again, another Supreme Court ruling just ruled in favor of this assistant coach of this football team that, according to the story, and I was not there, he started the practice of after the game, he'd go out to the 50-yard line by himself and kneel down and pray. And after a while, some people started joining him out there, and the school told him he couldn't do that anymore. And the case made it all the way to the Supreme Court, and they decided to end his favor. That he could. Can you begin to see that today why we have this problem when there are no standards? There's nothing set. There's everything subjective. You can teach atheism in our public schools, but you can't teach God in our public schools. You're not supposed to pray. And then they say, well, Well, you can have prayer if it's a student-led prayer, and if it's a generic prayer, if it doesn't pray in the name of any particular being whatsoever, and it can be generic and it can be student-led. Can you tell me where that is in our Constitution? First Amendment, Congress shall make no law respecting the establishment of religion, nor prohibiting the free exercise thereof. Now tell me where in there it says that you can't pray in school. That's things we have to determine, but the Constitution just doesn't say it. I get further than that, I get too far along here. Atheistic evolutionary biologist William Provine, that's what he said. Scientists face it, science and religion are incompatible. Provine went on in the article to accuse evolutionists who failed to take their theory to its logical conclusion of suffering from the trying to have one's cake and to eat it too syndrome. In other words, you can't say one without the other. So he's saying you can't have faith, and it depends on how you say it. And I've had the question, are science and religion incompatible? If you restrict science to atheistic evolution, yes, it's incompatible. But you realize science is more than that. Look at all the things in science and all the things you can study in science and all the scientific method, the scientific theory. Nothing precludes you from believing in God, but he says you can't believe in both. Prophets suppose that they may be acting out of fear or wishful thinking. In other words, a lot of the atheists, he's saying, they're afraid to say this. They're afraid to say that they're incompatible because of living out of fear, or may just be intellectually dishonest because they do not boldly admit what he does. Atheistic evolution is true. Therefore, no inherent moral or ethical laws exist. This is a college graduate and supposedly intelligent, and in most ways intelligent human being. Atheistic philosopher John Paul Sartre says, everything is indeed permitted if God does not exist. We cannot find anything to depend upon either within or outside ourselves. If God does not exist, values or commands that could legitimize our behavior, thus we have neither behind us nor before us in a luminous realm of values any means of justification or excuse. Isn't that uplifting? If God does not exist, then objective moral values do not exist. They acknowledge it. Everything is indeed permitted if God does not exist. Yet, atheists refuse to admit that real moral objectivity exists. Then they are forced to admit that, for example, when the Jews were starved, gassed, and experimented on like the animals they reportedly were, the Nazis did nothing inherently wrong. Is that not true? If there's no objective truth, if there is no objective morality, if there is no law, this universal, if there is no lawgiver, then what would make what the Nazis did to the Jews wrong? And the answer is nothing, unless you have something to go on. Anybody have any questions or comments?